Welcome to Nexus, the programme that explores the spiritual dimensions of cultural and religious issues. I'm Rebecca Masterton. There is said to be a crisis in Europe in the state of our children. They are under pressure to achieve results, have to cope with difficult adult problems, and often resort to drugs and violence. Their lives often lack any spiritual dimension. So what is being done to address this? Today, to discuss this, are my three guests: Nassim Joban, a specialist in Islamic psychology and also a business psychologist; Sonia Soda, Research Fellow from the Institute for Public Policy Research; and Winsome Duncan, otherwise known as the Lyrical Healer. Welcome to the programme. Thanks for being here. Nassim, I wanted to start with you. Britain does seem to have a different attitude towards children from the rest of Europe, and children are often excluded from adult social activities. I mean, is there a particular attitude in Britain that's causing children to resort to aggression and violence, would you say?
Yeah, I think that what's missing is the whole kind of family dimension that you get in Europe very much. You hear people saying, well, you know, children aren't invited to certain weddings or parties or restaurants. And for me, that's a great loss. I mean, you know, I think that to have, and actually, I just heard on the radio recently about a restaurant that said only families are welcome. So that was lovely, and that was from an Asian program. And
that was actually mentioned because it was so unusual that it had a sign saying.
No, this was actually an advert that I was listening to. It was an advert. So I think there's a great loss, you know, for us in Britain, where children are not included. They don't have, for example, role models that they can look at. You know, back home in our countries, we would perhaps have 3 generations living together, and there was an implicit learning that took place. Yeah. That's missing. So without that kind of role model, without that sort of diffusion of responsibility as well, where everybody, you know, takes care of in bringing up a child, you know, that's really a loss for our children.
And is that contributing, would you say, to the sort of the aggression that we see in young children?
I would say it very much is, partly because of frustration from their part, lack of communication between adults and children. I know that a group of mothers and I are quite involved in redressing this issue, where one of my friends from my child's school said, look, you know, in Africa it takes a whole village to raise a child. And we're seeing even in our local areas that a 13-year-old boy was responsible for now, unfortunately, the death of an 83-year-old man who confronted him. So of course we've got all of these issues, and they're our children, and we have to take responsibility collectively, I think.
I mean, Winsome, you've done a lot of work with children, and you've produced a book called The Food Spiral as well, which addresses children's sort of negative self-image. And what are some of the challenges that are facing young people today?
Well, a lot of the children that I work with have special educational needs. So they've either been in the care system, they've got behavioural disorders like ADHD, they could be dyspraxic or have dyslexia. So when they come to me, they're already troubled young souls, so to speak. So my role is to uplift and empower through drama, poetry and, you know, music, really. I work with about ages from 5 upwards, and we do positive affirmations. I am worthwhile, I deserve the best, I am somebody. And we do that in a circle, and then sometimes we do it in pairs, and we make eye contact, and you know, we really get them to centre back to themselves, because they need to come from a platform that shows you have skills that you can give to the world. And just because your circumstances are adverse at the moment doesn't mean that in the future, once you've grown up and made your own decisions, you know, you can make life-changing choices through creativeness, you know.
And Sonia, you've written a paper called Get Happy: Children and Young People's Emotional Wellbeing. What was that?
Well, what that research looked into, and sort of research that you know, other research that we've looked at in our institute to do with young people is, why do we have some of the problems that you referred to, particularly in the UK compared to the rest of Europe? Why do, you know, we have a higher rate of alcohol abuse amongst young people, higher rate of drug taking, lower ages, average ages of sexual engagement than on the continent? And what our research has done, you know, holistically is to ask those questions why. And I have to say, our research backs up both what Nazim and Winston have been talking about, which is, first of all, it shows that when you look at countries on the continent compared to the UK, children tend to spend more time in quality relationships, structured relationships with adults. So if you look at countries such as Italy and France, survey data shows that children spend a lot more time you know, in quality conversation with their parents, with extended families, which are much more common on the continent. They're more likely to eat dinner around the table 5 times a week than in the UK. When we look at the Nordic countries, we see they have better welfare provision, they have better provision of structured extracurricular activity for their children. So an increasing trend that we're seeing right now in the UK, I think, is that young people are becoming increasingly socialised, not by adults, but by their peers, in a sort of Lord of the Flies phenomenon. And we know this is very damaging for children, because what's very important for children is that they do have the opportunity to build proper bonds in structured relationships with adults, with mentors, and we know that it's children who don't have the opportunity to form those bonds who are more likely to go on to commit antisocial behaviour. And just referring to some of the things that you were saying, Winston, about qualities such as self-esteem and the amount of control that young people feel they have over their lives. Research from our institute has shown that these qualities are becoming more and more important in today's world, because increasingly young people, they don't have defined, you know, life paths set out for themselves. Increasingly in the changing world of work, people need to define their own transitions, and they need, you know, old-fashioned skills like self-esteem, you know, old-fashioned gumption really, when it comes to making the transition from school to further education and university to work. And, you know, it's really, for public policy, the question is, how do we improve these skills in our young people? Because it's clear that there's an increasing sort of socialisation gap. So children from more affluent backgrounds who have more access to extracurricular activities, who, you know, have very stable lives at home, have much more of an opportunity to form these skills than children from less advantaged backgrounds.
I mean, you're talking about work, but Nazim, we can also see that our society is structured around skills and education, but there seems to have been, at least for the last 30 years, an attitude that their spiritual development is almost irrelevant. So the spiritual development is not addressed. I mean, what does that say about our society as well?
I think I actually feel quite positive and excited about what's happening. Now, what's happening is because of the recognition that there's a spiritual void, I think people are now actually looking to redress this. And, you know, it's not that these things happen overnight. It's that, you know, that it's happened over a great deal of time. So the last generation, perhaps, there's been, you know, sort of a great deal of emphasis on sort of structured religion, without the inner dimension of spirituality. And that leads to all sorts of problems. That leads to sort of kind of wanting to please others, wanting to look good.
Practicing a religion for your family.
Exactly, for the extended network, for, you know, people in society. And that leaves a big gap.
So actually we can see that in a secular or non-religious environment, and also in the people that are religious in this society, in both realms there's a lack of a spiritual dimension.
I feel so very much. And in fact my work involves going in and working with families. I mean, I work mainly in sort of corporations, but certainly wherever I'm called, working with families, and that's often an issue that I address, is that, you know, do you want, you know, the development of your child? And I ask them to answer as honestly as they can, and it's often no. It's often to do with, you know, what does Granddad think? What will others think? And so it's kind of bringing people back to, well, you know, it is just about the development of the individual and their healthy development, and the recognition that we go through certain phases. You know, children are meant to be naughty when they're at a particular developmental stage. They're meant to, but what happens is that we put a lid on it. And then you get what Winsome was describing, children who are lacking in self-esteem, lacking in self-worth, but then what happens is that we develop into adults without the recognition that that has happened. So I really applaud what Winsome's doing in terms of you know, kind of bringing it to the surface with these affirmations, which then act and help to neutralize the negative beliefs that people have. And the whole area of emotional empowerment and emotional intelligence and the development of emotional competences is again, and social competences, is again a very exciting area for children, I feel.
And our reporter, Vanya Mendes, went out to ask whether people in Britain think that the internet blights children's lives.
What is it like to grow up in a society like Britain? We came here to Hammersmith in West London, and we're going to try to find out what the general public thinks of some of the challenges of childhood today. Do you think that there should be a limit to the access that children have to things like internet, television, computer games?
Yes, I think there shouldn't be no access for children maybe under 18, because the children, especially children that don't have both of parents, they're idolizing certain things that's not good for them. They think it's good for them, but it is not.
I think there should be a limit. I also think that they should have less aggressive, like some of the bands that they do have on them, still children watch them, they're G-rated, but they still have a lot of physical violence, a lot of things that I don't think children should see, even the video games. And the problem with the internet is they might Google something, because Google is a good thing, but it also has a bad thing. My son Googled PSP, ended up like this girl hotline thing. Some woman's telling him here's her size and this and that, because they attach it, I think, purposely, knowing the children are going for something innocent, but they end up getting something else.
Well, yeah, as long as they're supervised by adults, they can have unlimited anything they want. But
not internet, though. I don't think internet is a good idea.
Because the thing is, in internet, if your computer is not saved up, it does pop up some stuff that you don't want kids to see. You see, that's the whole problem. But other than that, I mean, the internet is very good help for them. TV is very good help for them. Considering you're in England, they don't have much stuff for kids to do, so kids more likely to stay at home, watch TV, and try to do sport, but then it's too cold outside, so that's the whole point. But yeah, they should have limited access or unlimited access as long as there is an adult sitting beside them.
Tell us, do you think there should be a limit to access that children have to internet and television, computer, video games?
For children, yes, I do. Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, children should be children for as long as possible, and I think the parents should have more of it. But it's complex in Britain at the moment because of the family makeup.
I definitely do, but today it's all focuses on business, on making money, and I think when it comes to certain limitations of what age groups should do what, the more you say that they cannot do it, especially if they're young teenagers, the more difficult it is to control the whole situation. Because if they don't do it at home, they'll go to a friend and do it, or they'll find access to be able to see something that they're not allowed. And I think with the money that people are making through internet, through all these things, it's really difficult to control.
Some experts say that kids are being overprotected, but at the same time, parents worry about what kind of information is available on the internet and about the time that kids spend in front of the TV. So what can be done about it?
That was Vanya Mendes on the streets of London. Winsome, do you think that children through the internet are having their lives blighted by images of the celebrities and violence, images of violence as well? Is this contributing to, is this having a damaging psychological and spiritual effect on children, would you say?
I definitely think it contributes. I think what's happening is we're living in a society where violence is acceptable to be seen on the television. We're living in a society where, you know, they're promoting sexual connotations, that kind of thing, and it's not on. First of all, there are things that parents can do. They can do like the blocking of the security code on the internet. That's one way to prevent. Like you've just heard, the lady just said her son was on there and then she's talking on a hotline. I mean, I don't know how old he was, but it's really sad when we live in a society where our children are now vulnerable. We've got paedophiles that are tracking 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds through places like MySpace, Facebook, that kind of thing, pretending to be their friend, to go ahead and seduce them. And we need to protect our young people.
Do you feel that young people aren't protected enough? Do you think that they're too exposed?
Definitely, because they're glamorising gun culture in all of those hip-hop videos, saying that, you know, wear the bling, this is what it's all about, this is street, this is hip-hop, the ghetto lifestyle. That's not something that I'm about, and that's not something that I want our children in the generation to come to be about. But with technology and this age that we're living in, we're finding that it's natural to be exposed to violence, crime, sex and drugs, you know, and then they want to imitate this. They want to become what they see on TV, so they're in the classrooms talking about their PIMP. Ridiculous.
And also, I mean, another thing that said about children in Britain is that 1 in 10 are on antidepressants. Under 16,
shocking.
1 in 10 children under the age of 16 are on antidepressants.
That's shocking. See, the thing is, with tablets, what they're doing is they're not looking at what's going on inside, you know, and they want to treat it with this medicine, with that medicine, and not the holistic approach, not the approach of, well, what's going on with your spirit? What's going on with your emotion? How do you feel today? What's happened in your past? Because the children that I have worked with have had troubled past, you know, some of the kids have been beaten up, some of them their parents are alcoholics, and the list goes on, and I've heard so many tragic stories, and my role is to say, well, you know what, you can be better than a rapper that you see on the television with his cane, with his bling. It's not about that.
And Nasim, you specialise in what's called ilm al-nafs, knowledge of the self in the Islamic tradition. I mean, what does that say about bringing children up with spiritual awareness? What does that teach?
Well, I mean, I think the underlying thing about this is that we're here in this realm to develop an awareness of our creator, whatever you want to call our creator, reality. And that there are certain developmental stages that happen along the way. So we have, first of all, the nafs al-ammara, which is the very ego self, which Freud referred to. Now, what happens is that people don't, you know, when you're a child, this is acceptable that you're going to be difficult, be egocentric, think that the world revolves around you. But what we have lost, I think, both spiritually and sort of in, you know, in our religion and every way, is that the grooming of this, the grooming of the self to reach what, I don't know, for want of a better word, might be enlightenment or full humanness. I think Maslow referred to it as becoming, Rogers rather referred to it as becoming fully human. And there is a process to this, and that's certainly what I engage with in my children, you know, so that when these television programs are on or the internet is on, I made a conscious decision that I didn't want to exclude my children from life. I know that some of my friends, you know, didn't have television. They felt so bad, you know, so sort of strongly about it. And I decided that I was going to watch the television programs with my children and develop their furqan, develop their discriminating qualities, and by doing that, move them from this egotistical self to then the reproachful self, to the inspired self. So it is these stages that the development of a human being happens. But what we have is a society where the individual has not been groomed, and so you have adults who are very much at the stages of a 5-year-old, I'm sure we'd know people like that.
Would you agree with that, Sonia, that the adults...
I actually, just to come back on a different point, I think another issue that we haven't talked about, apart from, the violence and the presentation of celebrity culture in the media, is the amount of consumerism in society at the moment as well. And we know that our children are being exposed to increasing amounts of advertising through the television, through the internet, our sort of changing media context, digital switchover, and the proliferation of new kinds of media like social networking sites means that our children are being exposed to sort of an ever increasing, more diverse sort of set of advertisers.
I mean, this is another thing that parents say they don't want their children to have, for example, spirituality to be taught in schools because it's indoctrination. But wouldn't you say this is also another form of indoctrination, this sort of constant adverts for things?
Well, we know that adverts are now, adverts target children directly. Advertisers are looking to take advantage of what's called pester power, which means, they're targeting children directly to pester their parents.
They actually call it pester power.
They call it pester power. That's what it's called, which is, very worrying, I think. So we've moved from an age where, sort of 20 years ago, advertisers would directly target parents when you're talking about, children's books, say, children's toys, to an age where now advertisers, in the recognition that, first of all, that children have more pocket money, which they spend directly on goods themselves. We know children now have more pocket money than they've ever had before. But secondly, because, the nature of the parent-child relationship is changing. And because of this phenomenon of pester power, advertisers are targeting children themselves. And I think that's very unethical and something that we really need to, as a society, think about how we tackle. Now, we've seen the government recently ban all advertising around children's programmes, on sort of junk foods. But the question is, can we take it further?
All right, we can talk about that after the break. You've been watching Nexus, and we've been discussing the spiritual state of children in our society. See you after the break.
Secretary of Defense Robert Gates is appealing to China to help Washington stop Iran's nuclear program. China's foreign ministry spokesman stressed that relevant parties in Iran's nuclear case should continue dialogue and negotiation. Israel says the IAEA and its leadership are guilty of not taking immediate action against Tehran. Iran, an NPT member, has become cooperating with the IAEA to clear up any ambiguity about its nuclear program. Israel, on the other hand, has never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Norway will send more troops to Afghanistan to help NATO-led forces there. Norway says it will deploy 250 soldiers in Kabul and northern Afghanistan, but is unwilling to send its troops to the violent southern part of the country. China says Myanmar's problems should be solved by its own government and people. China says it welcomes the latest visit by UN Special Envoy Ibrahim Gambari to Myanmar, but it is not optimistic the situation will be eased quickly. Protesters from the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions clashed with police in Seoul as they demonstrated against the working practices of an electricity construction corporation. Police sprayed the protesters with water cannons after scuffles broke out during the rally. A bus and a car have collided in Portugal, killing 13 people and leaving at least 24 injured. The crash occurred on a highway and caused both vehicles to fall into a ravine. Police said the cause of the crash is still not clear. And in India, a team of 30 doctors has begun operating on a 2-year-old girl born with 4 arms and 4 legs. The girl was joined to a twin who stopped developing in their mother's womb. She has absorbed the limbs and other body parts of the undeveloped fetus.
Welcome back to Nexus, the oasis of civilized dialogue. We've been discussing the spiritual state of children in our society. My guests are Naseem Joban, a specialist in Islamic psychology, Sonia Soda, Research Fellow for the Institute for Public Policy Research, and Winsome Duncan, otherwise known as the Lyrical Healer. And Winsome's written some poems that address the issue of food addiction and negative body image for children. So she's going to read us a couple of her poems now.
Obsession is the lesson. Obsession is the lesson. I strike out with candy kisses, replacing jammy moments with cinnamon sprinkles. I'm forever a fruity rainbow when it hurts, giving creme fraiche answers that are sandwiched between today and tomorrow. Caught up in the middle of melted sticky toffee, promoted bittersweet reflection. Forgive me, for I have chicken chow mein dreams that are coated in hyacinth sauce. I've been pushed down by the jelly babies. I've been pushed down by the strawberry swirls and the pecan pies. I hear chocolate deluxe calling my name, and then I answer in a blueberry muffin tone. Yes, I'm fixated on taste and flavours every minute of every day. And now I slip into a Caribbean rum punch depression, muttering I will never change. Life's roads. Life has many roads that weave and intertwine. The direction I seek is one of an enlightened mind. I drove to surrender and stayed a while. The road was dusky, but it was my divine mile. We sat in the dusk, surrender and I. Then I let go of the who, what, whens and whys. I rested on a bed of healing to awaken to a new day greeting. I got into my car of life, meditating on clearing past headaches and strife. The sky was crystal blue. I could see the morning dew. I stopped by Mr. Assertive's home for a warm hug and a speakerphone. Now I can turn up the volume on a voice that was once scared, telling my fears to disappear. Sometimes I may take the wrong road. That's when my friends and family help me to offload. Right now, I'm going to keep moving in the direction of the light. I am going to keep praying until I know I can get right.
Thanks a lot, Winsome. That was a very beautiful poem about food and about the psychology. So if you'd like to come over and join us, that was great.
Thank you.
And do you read these poems with children?
Yeah, what I do is I get them to write poetry. If I'm doing a creative sort of drama session, I use creative words and poetry, and then we do exercises and games to help, like an icebreaker, to make them feel more friendlier. And the poetry that I do is basically on positive body image. So we do something called a body rap, you know, something, I love my body, it's good for me, it helps me move, it's wonderfully made, something like that, just to get the creative juices going amongst their peers. Also, I get to sit them down in a circle and we'll say, okay, what do you love about your body? Tell us. And they'll say, oh, I like my hair, I like my nails, I like this, I like that. Okay, well, what do you hate about your body? And it's amazing what the children would say. They'll say, oh, well, I don't like my hairy arms. Or they'll say, oh, maybe I'm a bit too podgy on the tummy. One child had an operation and she was very conscious of the scar that was left within the operation. So we look at all of these issues and then use it as a stimulus to get the poetry writing. So be positive, you tell us what your body raps are.
I mean, do you think as well that the media, because we've got certain models of beauty, again, that are being projected on children, is that creating a kind of something quite sick, really, which is sort of teaching children to hate how they look?
I believe so. I think with models, it's creating bulimia and anorexia in young children, young girls that want to be the size 0, which is the size of a child 8's waist, probably about that big, and it impacts on them and their confidence because they just don't feel like they're recognised or they're wanted, because society says if you're not a size 0 or if you're not a size 10, then you don't belong. And then these children are left with, oh, well, how can I make myself better? Oh, I'm going to throw up and I'm going to be sick, so I don't put on the weight. And then they take these eating disorders into childhood, and then we've got a problem.
And Sonia, I mean, have you thought about childhood image in your paper or your research?
Well, as Winston's saying, it's a really big part of childhood image, definitely body image, and it's one of a whole host of sort of extra pressures that our children are feeling. And I think, you know, a really good way of sort of thinking about this phenomenon is a sort of extended adolescence, which means, you know, our children are sort of being subjected to adolescent pressures earlier and earlier and younger. I mean, even now, if we look at advertising for sort of products that you'd think were for teenagers, you know, such as like perfumes and makeup, we see that actually the advertisers are sort of directing their advertising at younger and younger age groups. So you have an extension of adolescence at sort of at the younger ages, but also at, you know, older ages. So, you know, young people are sort of taking on responsibility at later and later stages compared to an earlier decade. So we're seeing this sort of stretching out of adolescence and an erosion of childhood, and I think that's a very sad phenomenon.
I mean, Nassine, you said you feel quite positive about what's being done to address issues of childhood spirituality. I mean, do you think the government's doing enough to address this?
No, I don't. I mean, I know that certainly in the school that my older daughter is at, they've started an initiative on emotional intelligence, which I'm thrilled about, because that, you know, as well as being one of my areas of expertise, acknowledges that we don't actually have the words to express our emotions, and that's a starting point. You know, and also,
why don't we have the words to express our emotions?
I think that what happens is that we cover them up. We've got to, especially sort of, you know, traditional Western culture, British culture is, you know, stiff upper lip, don't speak about it, don't talk about it. But I've actually noticed this very much so in my own Asian culture. Don't speak about it. And so when, you know, I've been accused of kind of analysing to death, but I do encourage people to talk about stuff, because when you're talking about it, it is an expression, there's an energy to that expression, which is obviously the work that you do.
I mean, is this being encouraged by the government with these initiatives?
Well, certainly the emotional and social adjustment is a pilot study at the school that my daughter goes to, and I'm hoping very much that, yes, it's being recognised. The area itself is quite new. It's only been developed since the 1990s, but what the underlying thing about both all emotional intelligence, positive psychology, and a lot of work is awareness. It's actually bringing to people's awareness certain things which adults should have had and haven't had, and which now, if they're starting in schools, you know, our children are going to have a bit of a kickstart with this. And that's quite an exciting thing. And I think that comes from sort of the whole history of counselling and psychotherapy, which has been in the past, you know, sort of the new way to develop people.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right that it's incredibly positive that, you know, government's recognising that there are social and emotional aspects of learning which should be the focus of our, you know, our school system, as well as, you know, hard attainment, GCSEs. But one really interesting thing I think we should think about is, you know, what age should we start thinking about social and emotional learning? And I've actually just, you know, recently did a study visit to Finland to have a look at their school and education system out there. And one thing that was very interesting was that there is a real focus in their sort of early years education, so from ages 3 to 7, not on formal desk-based learning, but on teaching, you know, children how to interact socially, teaching them about emotional well-being. You know, children learn through democratic play, how to engage with each other, how to set rules within their, you know, within their groups, within their classes, and rules are set democratically. And you know, I thought that was very positive. And I think we need to think about, you know, how we start children thinking about some of these things when they're quite young, because you know, this is a very important age.
We can come to you after, Winsome. There is much debate about how much the government should monitor children's access to the media and how much the government in general should intervene in children's upbringing. We went to get people's opinion on that.
We're here in Hammersmith, West London, and we have been asking people what they think about what kind of information is out there available for kids. And now we're going to take a few more opinions. And do you think that, for example, the government should be more involved in the way that parents raise their children?
Yeah, definitely, but I think raising the children is our duty, it's not the government duties.
There has to be some sort of standards, or just society will just break down, I think. Personally, I think it's a useful tool to have, but I think it depersonalises society a little bit, using the internet all the time. You can't beat the personal touch, one-to-one.
We've got all sorts of new laws out, so yeah, maybe they should consider that.
I think the government is doing it here, but doing it very slowly. They're sort of progressing very slowly. I mean, we started now with the smoking thing, and then now they're putting the age up for smoking, and at the same time, they start limiting some stuff on TV. I mean, I was in America before, and it is there. It's unlimited. Basically, if you have a Sky there, it is open to everybody. Same with the internet.
But I think the government should have more of a ratings and should really in-depth look over the games and the movies and the things that children are watching, because that affects them. It affects their lives, it affects what they think is right and wrong. So yes, I think they should be more involved.
Definitely, I think so. But I think with that being enforced, sometimes it's, you know, what the individual parents allows and what they don't. And sometimes the more you, like I said previously, the more you put limitations, the more they'll find, especially if they're teenagers, to have access of it somewhere else.
To the parents, I think this world has too much nannying, and I mean, it's up to the parents. It's like film classification in the cinemas. I mean, I think the parents know their child and know how much that they can take or not take. So I don't think the government should do anything.
Rebecca, this is what people think in the streets of West London. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Vanya. Winsome, one of the ladies at the end of that clip said that the government shouldn't intervene, and that actually parents are doing a pretty good job and there isn't a great deal of a problem. Do you think the problem's being exaggerated with children? I mean, it's become a big topic in our media.
No, the problem isn't being exaggerated, because we have lots of problems with the youth, especially in the area that I live. There's a lot of high crime. It's a poverty-stricken area. Children are out on the street starting fires on cars. or otherwise known as the ghetto, if you will. The government has installed in the curriculum the BSHE program, which is physical, social, health and education. So they're beginning to start to pay attention to children need to have their spiritual, emotional, mental needs met. This is what they need. This is what needs to happen. I don't feel that the government is doing enough to protect our children. I don't feel that the government understand what goes through young people's minds. They've been told to grow up, to be mature, so they're getting themselves into things at 9, 11, 13, wearing all the short skirts, thinking they're grown women, hanging around with the older boys, smoking, and they're not being educated because mum's out, latchkey children, and it poses a problem. I think the government can invest more in community programs that can help these young people, take them off the streets, more training to help them with their vocational studies as well, and to definitely have a strand in there for the creative element, because they're looking at the practical, rational sides of a person's brain, but what about the creative arts? Painting, poetry, singing, drama. How can we express ourselves and put on plays about what afflicts our young people and to stop them dying in the streets through knife crime, gun crime, or just through any crime?
Yeah, Sonia, you're going to say?
Yeah, I think there are some very important ways in which government can support society in the way we socialise children. And I think you're right. I think, you know, provision of structured extracurricular activities for children is a really important one because we know it's children from less disadvantaged backgrounds who are able to access these activities.
I mean, but do you think that these moves are just cosmetic? I mean, do they really have any particular effect?
No, that's not what the evidence shows, that the participation in structured extracurricular activities, you know, it's not just any kind of activities. It has to be the sorts of activities where you've got an adult working with you, you know, preferably with mixed age groups, where you're working towards a defined goal, where you have some sense of self-achievement. These kinds of activities are shown in the evidence, in the data, to result in children that have improved self-esteem. They feel that they can, they've got more control over their own lives. They're associated with improved educational outcomes, improved behavioural outcomes. The hard facts are there, and you know, we have seen some positive moves from government, you know, in recent months, which is a very positive thing, and they're bringing out a new children's plan in the next few months. And I think, you know, we should be looking to them to say something about provision of these sorts of activities for young people in that plan.
I mean, Nassine, don't you think this is too little too late? Because
yes, I mean, what happens is that you know, societies develop and then you reach a crisis. This is certainly a response to a crisis, and huge amounts of work huge amounts of resources are needed now to stop what's been happening, to stop the pattern that's been developing over the years. So yes, I think there is very much an element of too little too late as far as the government.
I mean, do you think these classes that are being implemented now, you said you've got hope in them, I mean, do you think they're going to have an effect, a real effect?
I think they can have some effect, and I know that, you know, certainly I did come from quite a disadvantaged background and made a very conscious decision that actually that wasn't going to continue for the next generation that I had. And so I did use education. And I'd just like to pick up on Winsome's point about the creative side of things. One of the things in psychology that we understand is that only 4% of the brain's actually used. And the 4% of the brain is from the left side, which is about logic and reason and all the things that help to build an economy, you know, very rational thinking. And it is the development of the right side of the brain, which is the creative side, which is where huge learning can take place. And then we as a whole society can develop. So it is the creative aspects of learning that need to be introduced much more, and I have seen evidence of that actually in schools, and certainly the schools that I choose for my children do have elements in that, but I am so aware of the dearth of all of those things in the majority of schools. I was going to say, because who's
going to implement that? Because you're saying that actually adults themselves don't have that knowledge.
That's right.
And the government's bringing out a few packages, and some schools are implementing it, but are there actually really those kind of figures or mentors or people with knowledge to actually implement that?
Yeah, I think it's also a case of making sure, you know, a lot of our teachers are aware of this, you know, this kind of research, but it's also, you know, we know that, you know, that compared to other countries, there isn't as much sort of continuing professional development and you know, training for teachers once they've already started teaching. And I think, you know, some you know,
well, that was actually the question that I went in and asked, and I said, look, you know, you're going to be responsible for the emotional development of my child. What about the teachers who are actually doing this? Are they trained enough? So I think that we all have a responsibility as adults to ask those questions.
I mean, what's the role of the parent as well in this?
And to take that personal responsibility as parents, I believe, to what I encourage families to do is identify the philosophy of their particular family and what they want to do, because every family is different, and to work with that. But underlying all of it is that there is development. You know, what I encourage people to do is that there's no mistakes.
Right.
People don't make mistakes. They're just learning opportunities. I know it sounds sort of very psychology, but it is. I mean, that's how people develop. And when you create that culture of no fear, then you actually get growth. You get incredible growth in children.
And what I see right now, I think, in our society is the way that we're moving forward is not working.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, we're at the crisis point.
Yeah.
It's epidemic. Children are becoming out of hand. You know, the reason why it can attribute to environments that they've grown up in, feeling like they want to get the new TN trainers, they want to get the new cross with, you know, the jewellery and be blinged out and stuff like that. So I think one of the things as well with funding, we can help to give these children a better start. But one of the concerns that I have as we move towards the Olympics, they're going to be starting looking at the sports kind of aspect and, you know, getting everybody physically fit and that kind of thing.
I mean, another thing that comes into this is with the Olympics, as I don't know if you heard that Kids Company, run by Camilla Batman Khalij, is actually in danger of losing its funding because of all the money that's being put into the Olympics.
I haven't heard of that. So, I think that company is a great company. She does great work. I've seen her on television. And see, this is what the problem is. You know, they want to take the spotlight off of emotional issues, off of spiritual issues, off of the inner self, and place it into something else that is going to be touristy, generate more money, and yes, it's going to generate more jobs. But then what's going to happen to the children? Kids Company's great. That's very sad to hear that.
Well, I think that illustrates sort of one of the problems with our current approaches towards government funding of these kinds of programmes, which tends to be kind of quite short-term, quite project-based, and not enough kind of long-term commitment and long-term sustained programmes. I think that's a really important point you've highlighted there.
But also, as Winsome was saying, these children are growing up in a particular environment. I mean, it's not just at school, but it's also where they're living, the housing, the values that are being taught to them by those around them and by their peers. I mean, can the government policy actually alter the conditions of the housing and also alter their level of self-esteem and how they feel about themselves in society?
Definitely.
Yeah, I think material circumstance is very important, and you know, this government since 1997, it has made strides in the right direction. So you know, child poverty has come down quite a way since 97, since the mid-90s, but it's still, you know, we still haven't gone far enough. We've still got too many children living in poverty in this country, and it's something that needs to be addressed because it's the interaction of material and an emotional circumstance which leads to some of the problems we see today. And we know it's much more difficult to raise a child if you're living in poverty. I mean, that's just a basic fact.
And I feel one of the things that the government can do as well is get rid of all the high-rise estates, because research has shown...
That's a very practical recommendation you're making.
Yeah, it's going to be an expensive one as well, because research has shown that living in compact environments does something to the mental state. So you've got a high rate of suicide where people just want to jump off the block of their flats because of debt, poverty. They can't put food on the table for their children. So I think we need to demolish all estates any higher than 5 floors.
Right. Well, thanks very much. We've just got a couple of minutes. Naseem, just wanted to wrap up. What do you think is the future of the state the spiritual state of our children in society?
Do you know, I think that I've really reflected quite deeply on this, and I think if our children can be encouraged to know and to develop ultimately, and this is actually the work I do with corporations and with sort of directors of companies, to develop a wisdom. To develop a wisdom, and it's not just based on knowledge, but it starts with knowledge. And that's very, very empowering. So kind of encourage children to develop knowledge will actually help them to become empowered and develop spiritually as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Winsome, Sonia and Nassim, for coming here to discuss these issues. Well, we can have another programme on this and a whole nother topic, especially to do with child poverty. You've been watching Nexus, the religious and cultural dialogue programme, and we've been discussing the spiritual state of our children. You can watch Nexus on Saturdays at 14:05 GMT and Tuesdays at 10:05 GMT. And give us your views by emailing us at nexus@presstv.co.uk. In our next programme, we'll be discussing feminism. Has it reached the end of the road? A bientôt and kiotskete.
In Iraq, most of the men aren't getting the protection. Men over there working for Blackwater are still dying.
He couldn't even wear a camouflage shirt on base, let alone.
And I'm sure Halliburton is not going to be the company to tell him.
تضرب الناقوس قلت لها من علم الخوف ضربا بالنواقيس.
The American way is competition.
Sorry.
A bomber attacks a parliamentarian delegation in Afghanistan, killing tens of people. The Taliban deny involvement in the attack. Turkey's President Abdullah Gül says Ankara has made its decision on how to deal with the Kurdish rebels in northern Iraq. And Lebanon's Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri says he may delay a parliamentary vote for a new president if rival factions fail to agree on a candidate.